The house was warm enough to save her life, but she refused to sleep while something beyond the trees was still waiting. Snow pressed softly against the windows of the cabin outside Red Lodge, Montana, covering the porch rails and the dark line of pines beyond the yard. Inside, the fire settled low in the stone hearth. Gunnery Sergeant Ethan Cole stood near the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand, watching the German shepherd beside the stove. Sage had everything a dog could ask for. A full bowl, a dry blanket, a new bed placed close enough to the fire that the wool felt warm beneath his palm. She had eaten only half her meal, then walked once around the room, quiet and careful, as though inspecting a place she did not yet trust. Ethan had brought her home that afternoon from a small county shelter after signing the adoption papers with fewer words than the clerk expected. Sage was 7 years old, black and tan, with a silver touch around her muzzle and amber eyes that seemed older than the rest of her. Her previous owner had died the winter before. No family had claimed her. Ethan understood that kind of silence. "You can stay there," he said, nodding toward the bed. Sage looked at him, then toward the front door. The brass tag on her worn brown collar made a faint sound when she moved. Ethan turned off the kitchen light. The room softened into firelight and shadow. For several seconds, Sage remained beside the stove. Then she stood. Her nails crossed the wooden floor in 4 quiet steps. She stopped at the door. "No." Ethan's voice was calm, the same tone he had once used when weather, distance, and tired men all needed one clear answer. Sage did not scratch. She did not bark. She simply looked back at him. Ethan opened the door only far enough to check the porch. Cold air entered at once, carrying the clean smell of snow and pine. Sage slipped past his leg before he could block her. "Sage." She walked down the steps and crossed the yard. Snow reached halfway up her legs, but she did not hesitate. She stopped near the same fence post she had studied when they arrived earlier. Then she lowered herself into the snow and faced the northern tree line. Ethan stood on the porch in shirt sleeves, holding the door open while heat escaped around him. "Come inside." One ear turned toward his voice. The rest of her remained still. He pulled on his boots and coat, crossed the yard, and took hold of her collar gently. Sage rose without resistance. He led her back to the cabin, dried her paws, and guided her toward the warm bed. She lay down. Ethan waited. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The fire shifted with a small pop. Sage lifted her head. Her eyes moved to the door. "Do not start," Ethan said. She stood again. The second time, he shut the door before she reached it. Sage stopped, looked at him, and sat. There was no fear in her face. No confusion. Only patience. As though she expected him to understand something he had not yet been told. Ethan placed a folded blanket across the base of the door and returned to the table. He had learned long ago that most problems became smaller when ignored. Sage waited until he turned away. The brass tag touched the doorknob with a soft metallic click. Ethan closed his eyes. When he looked back, she was standing on her hind legs with one paw resting against the wood. He opened the door again. She stepped outside, crossed the yard, and returned to the same exact place near the fence. This time, Ethan followed without calling her back. Snow drifted around his boots. The temperature had fallen below 10 degrees, and the moon was hidden behind cloud. Sage did not lie down immediately. She stood with her body pointed north, nose raised, breathing slowly. The forest beyond the property looked empty. No lights, no movement, only trees disappearing into white darkness. Ethan watched her for nearly a minute. "What are you looking at?" Sage turned her head toward him. Then she looked back toward the pines. A gust moved through the branches, carrying something so faint he almost dismissed it. Wood smoke. Not from his chimney. From somewhere deeper in the forest. Sage lowered herself into the snow, but kept her eyes open. Ethan felt the old instinct return before he could name it. The sense that silence did not always mean nothing was there. He crouched beside her and saw a thin crust of ice caught in the fur beneath her chest, as though she had rested in this place before. "You have been waiting here," he said. Sage did not move. Ethan looked toward the trees again. The cabin behind him glowed warm and safe. The forest ahead offered neither. Yet Sage had chosen the cold 3 times. Not because she wanted to leave. Because something out there had not come home. Ethan stayed beside Sage until the cold began to work through his coat. The smell of distant wood smoke faded when the wind shifted, leaving only pine, snow, and the quiet breath of the dog beside him. He looked toward the northern trees one last time, then touched 2 fingers to her collar. Inside, Sage rose slowly. She did not resist when he led her back across the yard, but she kept looking over her shoulder until the door closed behind them. Ethan dried her paws again and added another log to the fire. Sage lay near the entrance instead of the new bed, her body curved against the draft, ears pointed toward the porch. He left the hallway light on. By morning, she was still awake. Ethan found her in the same place at 6, eyes open, chin resting on her front paws. A thin line of snow had gathered outside the threshold where cold air slipped beneath the door. He set fresh water beside her. "You did not sleep." Sage blinked once. Ethan poured coffee and moved through the routine that had shaped his life since leaving the United States Marine Corps. Check the weather. Inspect the truck. Clear the porch. Repair what could be repaired. Avoid what could not. He worked for the nearby wildlife reserve, maintaining generators, snow fences, trail gates, and emergency equipment used by rangers during winter closures. The job suited him. Machines gave clear warnings. Loose belts squealed. Weak batteries dimmed. Frozen lines stopped moving. People were rarely that honest. Sage followed him outside after sunrise. She stayed close while he cleared 8 inches of snow from the steps and checked the fuel shed. In daylight, the forest looked less threatening, but she still paused whenever she faced north. Ethan watched her nose test the air. "There is nothing out there for you now." The words sounded certain. He was not. At the reserve maintenance yard, Sage lay beside the truck while Ethan repaired a cracked housing on a portable generator. She ignored the voices of 2 workers nearby, the clatter of tools, and the smell of diesel fuel. When Ethan moved, she moved. When he stopped, she waited. She was obedient in every ordinary way. At noon, Claire Bennett drove into the yard in a Forest Service vehicle and parked beside him. She was 36, practical, sharp-eyed, and accustomed to noticing what other people dismissed. "That the dog from the county shelter?" she asked. Ethan nodded. Sage studied her, but did not rise. Claire crouched several feet away, allowing the dog to decide the distance. "Thomas Hale's shepherd." Ethan looked up from the generator. "You knew the owner?" Everyone around Red Lodge knew Thomas. Volunteer search and rescue for almost 20 years. Claire looked at Sage's worn brown collar. "He trained her himself." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. The shelter did not mention that. They probably did not know much. After Thomas died, Sage moved through 2 temporary homes before the county took her. Claire held out the back of her hand. Sage stepped forward and smelled it. She used to patrol the north trails with him. Ethan glanced toward the distant tree line beyond the yard. "She will not sleep inside." Claire's expression changed slightly. "At all. She lies by the door or goes into the snow. Last night, she kept facing north." "Did she bark?" "No, scratch." "No, then she was not trying to get out." Ethan waited. Claire stood. "She was trying to get you to notice where she was looking." He returned to the generator, tightening a bolt harder than necessary. Dogs grieve. They repeat old habits. They do. Claire watched Sage circle once and settle beside his boots. They also repeat trained behavior. Ethan said nothing. He did not like how easily the thought fit what he had seen. That afternoon, the Weather Service issued another winter advisory. Temperatures were expected to fall below 0 after midnight, with heavy snow moving in from the west. Ethan finished work early and drove home before the road worsened. Sage sat upright in the passenger seat, watching every turn. As the cabin came into view, she began to breathe faster. Not from fear, from recognition. Ethan parked, carried in groceries, and checked the porch. Near the fence post where Sage had waited the night before, something dark rested on top of the fresh snow. He crossed the yard and picked it up. A short pine branch, glazed with ice, its broken end clean and recent. Sage stood behind him, perfectly still. The nearest trees were more than 100 feet away. Ethan turned the branch in his hand. A narrow strip of faded blue rope was tied around it. Sage looked from the rope to the northern woods, then back at him. She had not brought him a toy. She had brought him the first part of a message. Ethan carried the branch inside and set it on the kitchen table beneath the hanging light. Meltwater gathered beneath the needles, carrying the sharp smell of pine into the room. Sage stood beside him, watching the faded blue rope as if it mattered more than the fire, the food, or the warmth. Ethan turned the knot between his fingers. It was not random. The loop had been tied with a simple overhand hitch, the kind used for quick trail markers. He had seen hundreds like it in military field training and winter maintenance work. Where did you get this? Sage looked toward the door. Ethan waited. She did not move. He untied the rope and found a small metal tag hidden beneath the knot, dulled by weather. 2 stamped letters remained visible. T.H. Thomas Hale. Ethan felt the room grow quieter around him. He slipped the tag into his coat pocket, then checked the time. 7:42. Snow was falling harder now, filling the yard in smooth white layers. Not tonight, he said. Sage sat near the door. Her amber eyes stayed on him. At 9, she refused her food. At 10, she paced once through the living room and returned to the same spot. At 11:15, the brass tag on her collar touched the doorknob. Ethan looked up from the book he had not been reading. You know the temperature is dropping. Sage held his gaze. Then she lowered her head and pressed her nose against the blue rope lying on the table. Ethan stood. The old habit in him wanted facts. A map. A report. A reason strong enough to justify leaving shelter in a storm. The dog offered none of those. Only a branch, a rope, and the memory of smoke moving through the trees. He pulled on his winter coat and opened the door. Sage stepped into the snow but did not run. She crossed the yard, paused at the fence post, then turned north. Ethan followed with a flashlight. The beam caught blowing snow and the dark trunks of lodgepole pines. Sage moved with purpose, never more than 30 feet ahead. After 50 yards, she stopped and looked back. Ethan kept going. Another 50 yards. Another glance. She was not escaping. She was measuring whether he would stay with her. The ground sloped gently toward an old maintenance trail that had not been cleared in years. Snow reached above Ethan's boots. Sage lowered her nose and followed a scent line hidden beneath it. At a lightning-scarred pine, she stopped. A second strip of faded blue rope had been tied around a low branch. Ethan touched it. The fiber was stiff with ice, but intact. Thomas marked this route. Sage stepped past him. The trail continued north. They moved another quarter-mile before Ethan noticed the smell again. Wood smoke. Weak. Old. Carried in broken pieces by the wind. Sage lifted her head. Snow clung to the silver fur around her muzzle. Then she turned sharply toward a narrow opening between the trees. Ethan raised the flashlight. Beyond the opening stood a low structure almost buried beneath snow, no more than a dark rectangle against the white. A storage shed, perhaps, or an old trail shelter. Sage approached the door and touched it with one paw. Ethan listened. Nothing. He brushed snow from the latch and opened it carefully. The interior was empty. A metal bowl sat frozen to the floor. A few pieces of dry dog food remained beneath a shelf. In one corner lay a worn wool blanket covered with black and tan fur. Ethan swept the flashlight across the walls. No person. No dog. No fire. This is where you came, he said. Sage walked to the back wall and scratched once. Then again. Then a third time. Ethan knelt and saw that one wooden panel did not match the others. He pulled at the edge until it shifted. Behind it was a shallow compartment. Inside lay an old photograph, a folded trail map, and a coil of the same blue rope. The photograph showed Thomas Hale standing in snow beside 2 German shepherds. One was Sage, younger and without silver around her muzzle. The other was an older female with a pale mark above one eye. On the back, Thomas had written 2 names, Sage and Mara. Ethan unfolded the map. A blue line had been drawn from the shed deeper into the northern forest, ending at a second marked cabin nearly 3 miles away. Sage placed one paw on the paper. Ethan looked at her, then at the dark trail beyond the door. The shed had not been the destination. It was a message left halfway. Ethan studied the blue line on the map, while snow whispered against the shed roof. The second cabin sat nearly 3 miles farther north, beyond an abandoned patrol route that crossed a narrow ridge and a frozen creek. In good weather, the distance would have been manageable. Tonight, the storm erased every familiar edge. Sage stood beside the open door, facing the dark trail. She did not look back at the warm cabin behind them. Ethan folded the map and slipped it inside his coat. We are not going 3 miles into that without support. Sage stepped into the snow. Sage. She paused, but only long enough to make sure he was watching. Then she moved toward the trees. Ethan followed far enough to catch her collar and guided her back inside. She stood rigid beneath his hand, not fighting, not pulling, simply refusing to settle. You brought me to the map. That was the job. Her eyes stayed on the trail. Ethan reached for his radio, but the storm reduced the signal to broken static. His phone showed no service. He looked at the old photograph again. Thomas Hale stood between Sage and Mara with one hand resting on each dog. The image had been taken at the edge of a cabin, and behind them hung several lengths of blue rope from a wooden peg. The same rope marked the trail. Ethan checked the back of the photograph. Beneath the names was a date from 8 winters earlier and one additional sentence. North shelter stocked before first snow. He opened the wall compartment again, searching for anything else. At the bottom lay a small brass key and a narrow strip of leather that matched Sage's collar. The leather held another metal plate, scratched and dark with age. Ethan wiped it clean with his glove. The words were faint but readable. If she will not sleep, someone is still outside. Follow the blue line. Sage gave one low breath. Ethan felt something tighten beneath his ribs. This was not grief repeating itself. Thomas had trained the behavior. The refusal to rest. The fixed direction. The objects carried home. Sage had been taught to keep asking until a person followed. Ethan looked toward the storm. 3 miles. Falling temperature. An uncertain cabin. It was exactly the kind of situation he had spent years avoiding. Not because he lacked the skill. Because skill carried responsibility. And responsibility carried the possibility of being too late. A memory surfaced without warning. His brother's name glowing on a phone screen during a winter night. Ethan turning the device face down because he was tired, because the roads were bad, because he believed he could call back in the morning. The next call had come from someone else. Since then, unanswered signals had lived inside him like doors he no longer opened. Sage stepped close and pressed her nose against his hand. Snow melted along her whiskers. Ethan looked down at the message again. Someone is still outside. He could not prove it. He could not dismiss it. All right, he said. We do this properly. He found an emergency lantern, 2 wool blankets, a first aid kit, and a pair of snowshoes stored beneath the shelf. The shed had been stocked exactly as Thomas had promised. Ethan fastened the snowshoes, clipped a safety line to Sage's harness, and tied the blue rope coil across his pack. Before leaving, he marked the shed door with a reflective strip from his jacket. Sage watched every movement. You stay close. You stop when I stop. You do not disappear into the trees. Her ears lifted. Ethan opened the door. Wind pushed snow across the floor. They stepped outside together. The first blue marker appeared 50 yards beyond the shed, tied low around a pine trunk. The second waited farther north. Then the third. Each piece of rope remained visible just long enough to guide them to the next. Thomas had built the route for a dog to remember and a person to trust. After half a mile, the trail narrowed along the ridge. Ethan tested each step before shifting his weight. Sage moved carefully beside him, nose low, body steady. At the frozen creek, they found fresh tracks crossing the snow. Human boot prints. Not old. Not covered. Someone had passed there within hours. Ethan crouched and touched the edge of one impression. The snow was still sharp where the heel had lifted. Sage raised her head and breathed deeply. Then she pulled once against the line, harder than before. Ethan stood. The trail ahead disappeared into white darkness. But the message had changed. They were no longer following only memory. Someone was out there now. Ethan followed the fresh boot prints along the frozen creek, while Sage moved beside him, tense but controlled. The storm had thickened, turning the beam of his lantern into a narrow tunnel of light. Snow gathered on his shoulders and along Sage's back, but neither slowed. The tracks crossed the creek, climbed a low bank, and joined the blue-marked trail again. Whoever had passed this way knew the route. Ethan looked down at the prints. One set. Adult size. The steps were uneven near the incline, as if the person had been carrying weight or favoring one side. Stay with me, he said. Sage glanced back, then continued. The next marker appeared beneath a bent pine branch. After that, another. Then none. Ethan stopped. The trail divided around a stand of trees, one path continuing north, the other curving west toward lower ground. He checked the map beneath the shelter of his coat. The blue line went north. The footprints turned west. Sage stood between both paths, nose lifted, testing the wind. For several seconds, she did not move. Then she stepped west. Ethan folded the map. You know something I do not. They left the marked route and followed the boot prints downhill. The terrain became rougher, filled with buried roots and shallow drifts. Ethan shortened the safety line and moved one careful step at a time. Sage stopped beside a fallen log and lowered her nose to the snow. A dark wool glove lay half-covered near the trunk. Ethan picked it up. The inside was still damp with warmth. "Close," he said. Sage moved faster. The smell of wood smoke returned, stronger now, mixed with wet fur and cold iron. Through the trees, Ethan saw a faint amber glow. Not a steady light. A pulse. Fire behind frosted glass. The cabin appeared a moment later, small and weathered, its roof heavy with snow. One window had been covered with a blanket from inside. The chimney released only a thin thread of smoke. Sage reached the porch first and pressed her nose to the door. A sound came from within. Not a bark. A soft whine answered by another. Ethan knocked. "My name is Ethan Cole. I am here to help." No reply. He tried the brass key from the first shelter. It fit. The lock turned with a stiff click. Warmth did not meet him when he opened the door. Only air slightly less cold than outside, carrying the smell of smoke, wool, and dogs. An older man sat on the floor beside a small iron stove, wrapped in a faded green coat. His gray beard was covered with frost near the edges, and one hand rested on a black-and-tan German shepherd lying close beside him. Two young puppies were curled beneath a blanket near the stove. The older dog lifted her head when Sage entered. A pale mark above one eye caught the lantern light. "Mara." Sage froze. For the first time since leaving the house, all the tension in her body seemed to break at once. She crossed the room slowly and touched noses with the older dog. Mara's tail moved against the floor. One of the puppies stirred and crawled toward Sage's front legs. The man looked up at Ethan. His face was tired but alert. "Thomas sent you?" Ethan removed his hat. "Thomas has been gone a year." The man closed his eyes. Then she did. Sage stood between Mara and the puppies, checking each one with quiet, careful movements. The man watched her. "I am Walter Briggs. Thomas and I worked search and rescue together. I came up 3 days ago to bring feed and check the roof. The generator quit. Then the storm buried the south trail." Ethan looked around the cabin. A nearly empty wood box sat beside the stove. The radio on the table was dark. "Why did you not use the north route?" "I tried. Fell behind on daylight and turned back. Figured it was safer to keep the dogs warm than risk all of us outside." Walter nodded toward a stack of split chair legs beside the stove. That was the last dry wood. Ethan took off his pack and opened the emergency blankets. "You made the right call." Walter looked at Sage, who had settled beside Mara without taking her eyes off Ethan. "She came here every winter with Thomas. If one of us did not return, he taught her to carry the line home." Ethan glanced at the faded blue rope across his pack. "She has been trying for 3 nights. Walter gave a tired smile. "Then she knew before anyone else that I was missing." Ethan knelt beside the stove and added dry kindling from the shelter kit. Flame caught slowly, then held. The room filled with a little more light. Sage watched Mara breathe. Only then did she lower her head. Ethan understood at last. She had not refused comfort. She had been counting who was still outside. Ethan worked quickly, feeding the stove with the dry wood from his pack, while Walter wrapped the puppies more tightly in the emergency blanket. The small room brightened by degrees. Frost softened along the window. Mara lifted her head once, then rested it against Sage's shoulder. The two German shepherds lay close enough that their fur touched, one older and worn by winter, the other alert even in relief. Ethan checked Walter's hands, breathing, and speech. "You are cold, but you are steady." Walter nodded. "I have been colder. That does not make this a good idea." A tired smile crossed the older man's face. "Thomas used to say the same thing." Ethan looked toward the dark radio on the table. "Can it be repaired?" Fuel line froze. "I got the generator started once, then it quit for good." Ethan removed his gloves and opened the metal housing beneath the radio shelf. The line was intact but clogged with ice and old sediment. He warmed it near the stove, cleared the blockage, and used a small hand pump from the maintenance kit to restore pressure. The generator coughed outside, failed, then caught on the second attempt. A low hum moved through the cabin. One overhead bulb flickered to life. The radio followed with a burst of static. Ethan turned the dial slowly until a county frequency broke through. "Red Lodge Dispatch, this is Ethan Cole at the North Shelter on the Hale Trail. We have 1 adult male, 3 dogs, and 2 puppies. All alive. We need ground support at first safe light. The reply came weak but clear. Claire's voice answered first. Ethan, confirm your location. He gave the map coordinates and repeated the condition of everyone inside. Do not attempt the south trail, she said. A rescue team is staging near your property. Weather should ease before dawn. Understood. He set the radio down. Sage raised her head at Claire's voice, then settled again beside Mara. Walter watched her. She always hated leaving anyone behind. Ethan sat across from him near the stove. Thomas trained that. Partly. The rest was hers. Walter rubbed his palms together near the heat. He taught her routes, signals, how to bring a marker home. But no one taught her to worry. She came by that honestly. Ethan looked at the old dog and puppies. Why were they still here after Thomas died? Walter's gaze dropped. Mara would not adjust to town. Too much noise. Too many walls. Thomas built this place for winter patrols, so I kept bringing supplies. The puppies came after a ranch hand found them abandoned near the East Road last month. Mara took them in. One puppy crawled closer to her chest. Sage touched its back with her nose. You should have told someone, Ethan said. I intended to. Walter looked toward the window. Then the storm came early. Ethan understood the sentence too well. Intentions had filled the space between his brother's call and the morning after. He had spent years treating delay like fate because admitting it was a choice hurt more. Sage stood and crossed the room to him. She placed her chin on his knee. Ethan rested one hand against the fur behind her ears. You did not wait, he said quietly. She looked toward the door, then back at Mara. Not yet. The night passed in small tasks. Ethan checked the stove. Walter slept in short stretches. Sage moved between the older dog, the puppies, and the window. Near 4 in the morning, the wind began to weaken. The snow still fell, but no longer struck the cabin in hard sheets. Claire radioed that the rescue team had reached the first shelter and would follow the blue-marked route at daylight. Ethan stepped onto the porch to place the lantern where they could see it. The sky had begun to pale behind the ridge. Sage came beside him, snow touching her paws. For the first time since he had adopted her, she did not face the forest with restless urgency. She looked back through the open door. Mara slept near the stove. Walter breathed evenly beneath a blanket. The puppies were warm. Sage turned once in the snow, then walked inside without being called. Ethan followed. She crossed the cabin, circled beside Mara, and lowered herself to the floor. Her head rested between her front paws. Her eyes closed. The rescue team reached the north shelter shortly after sunrise, their orange jackets appearing between the trees like small flames against the snow. Claire entered first, carrying a medical pack and a thermos, followed by 2 county volunteers with a low rescue sled. Ethan had already cleared the porch and marked the safest approach with lengths of blue rope. Sage woke when the door opened, but she did not rush forward. She stood beside Mara and watched until Claire removed her hood. You found them, Claire said. Ethan looked towards Sage. She did. Walter was examined first. His temperature had improved, and his breathing remained steady, but the team insisted he ride out rather than walk. The puppies were placed together inside a padded crate lined with warm towels. Mara watched every movement, uncertain but too tired to object. Sage stayed close enough for the older dog to see her. She will travel better if they remain together, Ethan said. Claire nodded. Then we make room. They secured Mara on a second sled with Sage walking beside her on the safety line. The return journey followed the blue markers south. Morning light revealed what the storm had hidden: steep drops beyond the ridge, snow-laden branches, and the frozen creek crossing where the tracks had turned west. Ethan led the first sled while Claire stayed with Walter. Every few minutes, Sage checked Mara, then looked ahead toward Ethan as if confirming that no one had fallen behind. At the first shelter, the team stopped to rest. Walter sat near the wall compartment and looked at the photograph of Thomas with the 2 German shepherds. He always believed Sage would choose the right person, he said. Ethan adjusted the blanket around Mara. He did not know me. Maybe not. Walter glanced at the blue rope tied across Ethan's pack. But he knew her. Ethan did not answer. For years, he had distrusted anything that felt like fate. Fate was too convenient. It allowed people to call a missed choice unavoidable. Sage had not relied on fate. She had brought evidence. She had repeated the signal. She had refused comfort until someone listened. By late morning, the team reached Ethan's property. His cabin stood quiet beneath the clearing sky, smoke rising from the chimney where Claire's crew had restarted the fire. The porch light was still on. Sage stopped at the edge of the yard. For a moment, Ethan thought she might turn back toward the forest. Instead, she watched as Mara was carried inside, followed by the puppies and Walter. Only when every living thing had crossed the threshold did Sage climb the steps. The cabin felt smaller at once. Towels covered the floor. Water bowls lined the kitchen wall. Walter sat near the fire with a blanket over his shoulders while Claire called the clinic in town. Mara rested on Sage's new bed, the puppies curled against her belly. Sage walked through the room slowly, checking each corner as she had on her first night. Then she came to Ethan. He removed her harness and brushed melting snow from her back. "You can rest now." Sage looked at the front door. Ethan felt the old worry return. He had seen that look before. He waited for the brass tag to touch the knob. It did not. Sage crossed to the hearth, circled beside Mara, and lay down. Her head lowered. Her eyes closed. No one spoke. The fire settled into a steady glow, and the only sound in the room was the soft breathing of the dogs. Ethan stood near the doorway with one hand still holding the safety line. Claire watched him from the kitchen. "You could have gone back after the first shelter," she said. "I almost did." "Why did you not?" Ethan looked at Sage. Because she kept asking. Claire poured coffee into a second mug and handed it to him. Sometimes that is all a signal needs. Someone willing to answer twice. Ethan took the mug but did not drink. He thought of the phone call years ago, the one he had answered too late. The memory remained. It did not soften, but it no longer filled the entire room. Walter opened his eyes and looked toward the sleeping dogs. "Thomas used to leave the porch light on during storms," he said. "Said people walk farther when they know someone is waiting." Ethan glanced through the window. The small light above his own porch still burned in the morning sun. He had forgotten to turn it off. For the first time, he decided to leave it that way. By noon, the county veterinarian had examined Mara and the puppies inside Ethan's cabin. Mara was thin, tired, and dehydrated, but stable. The puppies were hungry more than anything else, and once warm formula reached them, they settled into a quiet sleep beneath a clean blanket. Walter agreed to spend several days at the clinic in Red Lodge for observation, though he protested until Claire reminded him that surviving a storm did not make him immune to common sense. Ethan drove them into town in the wildlife reserve truck, with Sage sitting upright in the back beside Mara's padded crate. She watched every turn, but not with the same urgency as before. The road no longer pulled her north. It carried everyone south together. At the clinic, Mara was given a room large enough for Sage to remain nearby. The puppies slept between them, small bodies rising and falling beneath the heat lamp. Walter sat in a chair by the window with a cup of broth in both hands. "Thomas would have liked this," he said. Ethan stood near the door. "A crowded veterinary room?" "No. You showing up?" Ethan looked at Sage. She did the work. Walter shook his head. She opened the door. "You walk through it." The word stayed with Ethan through the afternoon. When he returned home that evening, the cabin felt unusually empty. No towels across the floor. No puppies near the stove. No older dog resting on Sage's bed. Only Sage followed him inside, her collar tag making a soft sound as she crossed the wood floor. Ethan added a log to the fire and filled her bowl. She ate slowly, then walked to the front door. He stopped what he was doing. For 1 second, the old pattern returned so clearly that he could feel the cold before the door even opened. Sage stood there, looking at the knob. Ethan waited. "Do you need to go back?" She turned her head toward him. Then she walked past the door and settled beside the hearth. Ethan remained still. Sage circled once, lowered herself onto the rug, and rested her head between her paws. Her eyes closed. No restless breathing. No fixed stare toward the forest. Just sleep. Ethan sat in the chair across from her and listened to the quiet. It was different now. Not empty. Earned. Over the next several days, the cabin became busy again. Claire brought supplies. Walter called from the clinic with lists of repairs needed at the North Shelter. The county approved temporary care for Mara and the puppies at Ethan's property until permanent arrangements could be made. No one asked whether Ethan had space. By then, everyone understood he would find it. He moved the kitchen table closer to the wall, built a low sleeping platform beside the stove, and repaired the old dog gate in the mudroom. When Mara returned, Sage met her at the porch and walked inside beside her. The puppies followed in a clumsy line, slipping on the floorboards and bumping into one another. Ethan laughed before he could stop himself. The sound startled him more than the dogs. Claire heard it from the doorway. That may be the first time this house has made that noise. Ethan lifted one puppy away from a boot tray. The house did not make it. That night, the fire burned low while Mara slept on the platform and the puppies lay pressed against her. Sage made one slow circuit of the room. She checked the water bowls, the windows, the front door. Then she came to Ethan and sat beside his chair. He rested a hand against her shoulder. Everyone is here. Her ears softened. Sage walked to the bed he had first placed near the stove, the one she had refused on her first night. She stepped onto it, turned once, and lay down. Ethan expected her eyes to remain open. They did not. She slept deeply, surrounded by the breathing of the family she had refused to leave behind. Outside, snow continued to cover the yard and the northern trail. Inside, the cabin held more life than Ethan had allowed in years. He looked toward the porch light glowing beyond the window. He understood now that home was not the place where nothing could be lost. It was the place where someone noticed when a light was missing and went out to find it. Spring reached the mountains slowly. Snow remained beneath the pines long after the roads cleared, but water had begun to move again beneath the frozen creek, and the mornings carried the smell of wet soil instead of smoke. Ethan spent most weekends at the first shelter with Walter and Claire, replacing warped boards, sealing the roof, and clearing the old patrol route. The county approved the site as a seasonal emergency station for hikers, stranded drivers, working dogs, and anyone caught between weather and home. Walter painted the walls. Claire installed a new radio. Ethan repaired the generator and mounted a fuel box beneath the porch. Sage followed every task, moving from room to room with the quiet authority of someone inspecting work that mattered. Mara rested near the doorway while the puppies, now stronger and almost too curious, chased pine cones across the clearing. One would stay with Walter. The other had been adopted by a local ranger and his family. Mara would remain with Ethan and Sage, not because anyone had planned it, but because by then the cabin seemed incomplete without her. On the final afternoon, Walter brought out a wooden pegboard Thomas had once used for rescue equipment. Across the top, faded letters read, "Leave a line for the next one." Ethan cleaned the wood and hung the coil of blue rope in the center. Beneath it, Claire placed spare blankets, reflective markers, bottled water, and a weatherproof first aid kit. Walter watched from the steps. Thomas used to say preparation was another word for mercy. Ethan tightened the final screw. He prepared for a long time. He trusted someone would finish it. Sage stood beneath the blue rope, looking toward the northern trail. Ethan waited for the familiar tension in her shoulders. It never came. She turned toward the shelter instead. Near sunset, they mounted a small lantern above the porch. It was connected to a solar battery and designed to remain on through the night. Ethan tested the switch. Warm light spread across the steps and touched the first blue marker tied to a pine 20 yards away. Walter smiled. "Someone will see that from the ridge." "That is the point," Ethan said. The opening was simple. No speeches. No cameras. A few volunteers brought coffee and sandwiches. Claire's son, Noah, carried supplies and asked more questions than Walter could answer. A hiking couple stopped to read the emergency map posted beside the door. Sage greeted them, then returned to Ethan without being called. As darkness settled, everyone left except Ethan, Walter, and the dogs. They stood outside beneath a clear sky while the last winter stars appeared above the ridge. Walter handed Ethan the old brass plate from Sage's collar. The message was still visible beneath the scratches. "If she will not sleep, someone is still outside." "Keep it here," Walter said. Ethan looked at Sage. "It belongs to her. The lesson belongs to everyone." Ethan mounted the plate beside the door, low enough for a child to read. Then he added a second line beneath it on a narrow piece of pine. "Someone is listening." Walter read the words and nodded once. They walked back to Ethan's cabin under a moon bright enough to silver the trail. The porch light was already burning when they reached the yard. Mara entered first. The puppies followed, tumbling over one another near the steps. Sage stopped beside Ethan and looked toward the forest. For months, that look had meant unfinished business. Tonight, it held only recognition. The north trail was marked. The shelter was stocked. The radio worked. The lantern was on. Ethan opened the door. Sage stepped inside. No hesitation. No backward glance. Walter settled into the guest room, and the dogs gathered near the hearth. Ethan filled the water bowls, checked the lock, then paused with his hand on it. He thought of the years he had spent believing safety meant keeping the world outside. He left the door unlocked and lowered the porch light switch to its permanent setting. Sage lay on her bed near the stove. Mara curled beside her. One puppy rested across both of their paws. Ethan sat in the chair, listening to the fire and the slow rhythm of breathing around him. The house was not quiet anymore. It was alive with small sounds, each one proof that someone had made it in. Outside, light spilled across the snow, still hidden beneath the trees. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a person might one day see it and keep walking. Sage opened her eyes once, looked toward the door, then closed them again. Some homes are not built by walls. They are built by the promise that no one outside will be forgotten.